There it is. Hey, so thanks to everybody for coming. Really, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad we're talking about this stuff. We have to obviously, reach some decisions about what's going to be in this election plan. We have a council meeting coming up on Thursday, and it's important that we, make some decisions tonight about, how we want to respond to the comments that we've received from members of the council. And so I think that's going to be the principal business of tonight. And so I really appreciate everyone being here, and this is a good chance to hash it out and come to some decisions. George did the minutes last time, and unfortunately we haven't seen the edited version yet, so we're going to have to pass on doing the minutes, or approving the minutes for now, because we need a few minutes to review them. And George has also agreed to do the minutes for this meeting. Let's see who's here. Katie.
So the whole committee except for Leah is here, and she's coming in right now. So just give me a second.
Great.
Yeah.
There she is.
Yeah. And then I'm going to ask to unmute. There we go.
Hi, Leah. Wherever you are.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Leah. How are you? Welcome.
Thanks. I'm signed in on my phone. I have to restart my laptop, but how are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Good.
I know you're busy, and I appreciate your being here. And, I want to move forward as quickly as we can to just get into the meat of the subject tonight. And Leah, I wanted to ask you if you'd be willing to do the minutes, not for this meeting, but for the subsequent one, and maybe the one after that.
Maybe. Can we talk about that later?
Okay.
Do you need to nail it down now?
No, not necessary. Not
okay.
necessary. But we should know before the next meeting. So I think the main issue that's before the committee at this point is getting our election plan nailed down. Figuring out what's going to be in and what's going to be out. I am personally of the view that it's really a pretty good plan, and I have to admit to being a tad surprised by the level of commentary that it's gotten. But I, in going over the objections that a member of council has voiced, it seemed to me that really we're not as far apart as it may seem. And so what I'd like to do is to go over what I think are the controversial points in the election plan one by one, talk them out, and make some decisions about how we're going to move forward. We have to have a finished plan, obviously, by Thursday to present to the council, to ask them to introduce, and I'm not sure if they have to vote on it on Thursday or not for it to be adopted for January. I guess they would have to.
So just as the clarity there, all they have to do on Thursday is just introduce it, and then that will allow to the layover, and then they would vote. A final approval would be at the January meeting. So that's how it would work. So they can't introduce and adopt in the same meeting, but it's just setting it up for that.
Right, and once it's introduced, changes can still be made.
Correct. Yeah, any amendments and any of those things could happen after the introduction. So.
Okay. Okay. Well, so let's move forward, and I think it's pretty clear what the big issues are here. Excuse me. Let's see. So I think the first of them is whether or not we want this to be a mail-in election. or whether, there are other proposals that it be an entirely in-person election and some kind of hybrid. And I guess there have been a couple of descriptions of what a hybrid might look like. And so I just want to say that the more I think about this and the more I've attempted to explain it to people, the more strongly I feel that a mail-in election is really the best option at this point. There are a bunch of reasons for that. One is that not just in Martin's Additions, but certainly here, but across the country as well. Wherever mail-in elections are held, voter participation tends to be significantly higher. And that has been the experience of Martin's Additions over the last couple of years, where voter participation a few years ago was significantly lower than it was in the last two elections. And there could be multiple reasons for that, but it does happen to coincide, exactly with the adoption of mail-in voting. And I think that the reasons for that are obvious. There are a lot of people who find it hard to make a 3-hour window on a Tuesday night or a Thursday night. People have children that they have to take care of. People have, some people have movement difficulties. People are working and they find it hard to get home in time, or they don't want to come, or there's all kinds of things that may get in the way of them voting. So, a mail-in election obviously solves that problem. They can get a ballot. People will get a ballot several weeks before ballots are due, and they can pretty much vote it at their leisure. They can sit at the kitchen table with their kids, and kids can watch them vote and mail it in. The kids can help mail it in. So obviously, a second reason is COVID has not gone away. It's still remains a significant issue. We just don't know what the world is going to look like in May. I don't really have any clue from the little bit that I know about this Omicron variant at this point. It could be a thing of the past. It could be raging full tilt. I just have no idea. And, because we did mail-in elections in the last 2 years, principally because of COVID concerns, I think that's a significant second reason. I'm sorry.
I think.
I'm sorry.
Can people mute
Yeah.
if you have your TV on? Can you mute?
No, I'm not.
Natalie, could you mute, please?
It wasn't me. It was my husband.
Okay. Third, I think a really significant reason is the logistics and the complexity of a mail-in election, an in-person election, but especially a hybrid election. I think, the chance of error it just becomes very, very significant as we start sending numbers back and forth between ourselves and a contractor. The contractor would have to inform us that a ballot was canceled before we could issue an in-person ballot. I've been told that this constitutes election fraud if we issue 2 live ballots to the same person, and that gives rise to all kinds of problems. It raises the risk of, obviously, that somebody could sue the village, that could sue the contractor, that the election might be spoiled in some way because if we have double voting by some residents and not by others, there's a risk there. And I think it raises a question of whether our contractor would in fact be willing to undertake an election that involved that kind of complexity, where we're sending things back and forth and the chance of error is significant, and in which ballots may accidentally or intentionally be issued to 2 two ballots may be issued to the same person, which I think raises very, very significant legal issues. So that's where I stand, and I'd like to throw it open for a discussion. And let me just say, we're hoping to be done by 9 tonight, so that gives us an hour and 15 minutes to get through a whole bunch of issues. So I'd like to, restrict the discussion of this to maybe 10 to 15 minutes, if we can do that. Okay. I see Naomi has her hand up. Naomi, why don't you go ahead? Naomi.
Yeah, I'm asking her to. Yeah.
Okay. I wholeheartedly support a mail-in voting, full mail-in voting, for all the reasons you stated. And also because in the past, having served on the elections committee, I can tell you that it's not a lot of fun counting the votes under time pressure in the evening and after the election is over and not being able to share it with everybody. I think actually we can still have an event on the street and come together to celebrate the result of the election rather than simply submitting our ballots. So we can still have a sidewalk event and have a celebration of our democracy without giving up the maximum effect of the mail-in voting.
Thank you, Naomi. That's an interesting suggestion. I had, in our election plan, we had proposed doing a mail-in election and then having a drop box present at what we're assuming will be the sidewalk celebration. And so people could, come down, see their friends, get an ice cream, and drop their mail ballot into a drop box, which we would then forward the ballots to the contractor promptly. So that's another way to do it, would be to do it when the results come in. Maybe we could get one of those jumbotrons, and have it out on the sidewalk. But I guess I could be wrong about this, but my sense is that the decision to have a sidewalk celebration ultimately is the council's decision and not really ours. This is not really an election issue. It's a village issue. And, if we're concerned about COVID, having a sidewalk celebration is obviously just as dangerous as having an in-person election. This is something that the council is going to have to decide. But I can assure you, as we said in our election plan, that if it's approved as, in its current form, that we will be sitting down there on the sidewalk at the election table with our drop box, whether there's a celebration or not, whether it's raining or even snowing. Snow is not unheard of in early May. That's not impossible. So we'll be there whether or not there's a sidewalk celebration. So in a way, I think that's a separate issue. I do want to say, talking about the sidewalk celebration, that, both events, the sidewalk celebration and the in-person election, are a significant amount of work, especially for the staff, Niles and Martha and, whoever we hire to help with setting up and breaking down and so on. There's a lot of issues that arise just in arranging all of those things. And so the work burden, the labor amount is significant in running an in-person election. And if we combine it with a sidewalk celebration, I think we're really putting a huge burden on the staff. So, well, thank you, Naomi. Anybody else want to say anything about this? Naomi?
No, I'm done.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Naomi. What did you want to say?
No, I'm done. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Okay, sure. Natalie, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm asking. I asked her to unmute. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
I think we should forget the hybrid. I think we should I just stick to strictly by mail. It's just simpler because it's getting too complicated with the hybrid, with timing.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay.
There's
Paul? Oh, Paul is.
yep. You know, you should speak now, Paul.
All right, now I
Yep.
couldn't unmute myself, so that's all right. No, I think the sidewalk the sidewalk event should be part of the voting, and that we should continue that tradition. That sounds like a good opportunity for people to get together and so forth. I know it's a lot of work, but maybe we could all volunteer to help.
Right. Well, you know, as I say, I think the sidewalk celebration is a council decision. You know, whether that should be a drop box with the right for the ability for people to drop their envelope with containing the ballot into the drop box, or a real in-person election is I think separate from whether we should have a sidewalk celebration or not. Any views on that, George? Excuse me, Paul. Okay, George.
Yeah, Peter, I think I had mentioned it in my email earlier today that it seems like one of the other options that I had included in the email I circulated on Thursday basically goes back to the old approach. Is just going to have a more robust mail-in element and using a vendor for the mail-in rather than shifting the burden onto the committee and the staff, which is go back to a system in which mail-in ballots are due back to the vendor by noon, 3 o'clock, whatever the appropriate time for the last mail collection is on designated election day. And then you can pretty easily get the list of, okay, these are the ballots that have been mailed and arrived by the time. You go through the voter roll and say, okay, we can't hand you a ballot. You already mailed one in. And then we've got the in-person voting that night. And to maintain the participation benefits of mail-in, we can look at either one of the two routes, either making it easier for requesting mail-in ballots, either through the kind of automated system like we have with the leaf bags rather than having kind of forcing proactive one, or going to something where it's a little more automated where you can opt out of having a ballot mailed to you if you really don't want one, but other than that, we'll send them to you. And to avoid any voter fraud issues, it's, you know, all ballots that have not been received by 3 o'clock on election day are hereby, we're canceling all of them. So there's no chance that there's going to be a second one coming through. And if people are concerned, well, I dropped my ballot in the mail 3 days before election day, I'm concerned it might not be there.
Right.
They have the option then to come down, vote in person, you know, and
Right.
they would be able to come to the table and find out. So it seems like that is one of the options that I know had been discussed and mentioned, kind of trying to, that could be something that could alleviate some of the concerns and the need for things getting more complicated in terms of a bunch of different moving deadlines.
Right. I want to say something about this idea of hybrid elections and multiple moving parts. You know, we're a small committee, and, you know, my personal view is it's just not possible for us really to handle the demands of all of this hybrid voting, multiple things going on with the in-person voting, people canceling, sending numbers to the contractor, getting numbers back. I think there's a huge chance for human error that is just naturally going to happen. I think, you know, you're asking us to take on multiple tasks that, you know, in terms of, you know, sending out ballots early, showing up for voting, canceling ballots in advance. The idea that we're going to ask our contractor to send out 600 or so mail-in ballots and then cancel a significant number of them because people decide that they want to vote on the street, I think I think it raises real red flags for the contractor.
Well, Peter, to be clear, we're going to have to do hybrid no matter what if there's any in person, because we have to have an absentee system. I know the old system involved absentee balloting having to be done by the committee, but I think there's no reason why, if there is any in person, that we would be able to hire a contractor for handling any of the mail-in stuff. So if there's any in person, we're going to have to be comfortable sending a couple of numbers back and forth no matter what.
I'm really concerned about it. And I think, this idea of they send out a couple of hundred ballots, like 600 ballots to the community. And then we write back and we say, okay, now please cancel 200 of them and send out new ballots, or we're going to hand out new ballots. If I were the contractor under those circumstances, I would say this is a real opportunity for the possibility of fraud arising, that we cannot, keep track of all those ballots. We as the contractor don't know what's happening to the ballots being canceled and so on. It's a really large number to keep track of, particularly when, we've already sent out 600 live ballots. If it's just a few people, the people who, come down and say that they lost their ballot, that's one thing. If people perceive the opportunity that maybe their vote will count twice, I think they're going to start, there will be a large number of people who show up there. Then we're going to have to handle potentially hundreds of ballots that have to be canceled and resent. I think it's a recipe for disaster. Tiffany, you've been waiting for a while.
Yep, you're good. Go
Can
ahead.
you hear me? Okay,
Yep.
thanks. I think returning to the traditional in-person process, and using a vendor for any absentee mail-in or both. I mean, you could also have the same vendor doing the mail-in as well as the in-person. Actually alleviates some of the burden on the committee and the staff. I think it's.
I'm sorry. Say the proposal one more time to have a
So
traditional.
doing an in-person election, going back to what we did before, having an in-person election, and having, if you want a vendor, which would alleviate some of the burden on the staff and the committee, a vendor could do both parts. They could do in-person voting, and they could do the absentee process. I think I heard George say, and I like the idea of, just proactively putting it out to the community, like, do you want a mail-in ballot, a mail-in absentee ballot this year? In the past, it used to be on each voter to go and ask the committee for the ballot. If the committee was able to put something out to the community repeatedly during the process, do you want a mail-in ballot? Do you want a mail-in ballot? Then that would give people, a quick yes or no. And again, it would make it easier because then it wouldn't be 600 ballots. Let's say it was 200 that people requested. And you would have that list tightened. It would be a very defined list about who asked for an absentee ballot. Yeah. And then again, if it's the same vendor working with the mail-in and the in-person, they're going to have their tracking system to tell the committee, who has voted. And I like the idea of day of as well. Again, just kind of going back to what has been done in the past. If those ballots can be received by 3 p.m. that day, then that allows for, the absentee process to have been completed, voting in person to happen, and for you guys to complete the election count that evening. Mm-hmm. And I think there's great value there for the community to have the election be completed and done. And I just, the last thing I would say is, I think Paul's point about the tradition of in-person voting, maybe we add something this year like food trucks, if that's permissible, and that allows people, again, to vote in the way they're comfortable. If they ask for an absentee ballot, then they get to do the mail-in process that they're familiar with. If they desire to vote in person, then they're afforded that opportunity as well. Thank you.
Tiffany, I really appreciate it seems like it's a significant suggestion. I do think that we're kind of late in the process to be taking on something as complex as what you're suggesting. I have to confess I didn't understand, all of the backs and forths and who does what at what time, and things happen different. I think, we're 2 days away from having to have a proposal to the council that can be introduced and discussed and decided upon. And if, we were talking about this in September or October, we could take a serious look at it. But I think at this point, it's just not feasible for us to do that. And I hope you understand that. Okay. Jeff. Hello?
Yep, just 1 second. He's going. Yep, there we go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, thanks. I'll make it short, and thanks a ton for all the hard work by the committee. And I know there's always so much thought and passion and energy that goes into how these plans finally make it through the reference of the spaghetti machine until it's passed. So really appreciate that. I'm just a couple thoughts. First of all, background in public health. So I'm still looking at this with the lens of public health and public safety. I'm thinking of Niles. I'm thinking of his family. He's got a young family there, and just others. And so understanding this is not a post-COVID world. I mean, we understand Omicron is out there. We really don't know what the future is in store for future variants or need for boosters and things like that. So believe me, I wish this was a discussion that we could have where we did not have to worry about the possibility of future variants, but that's just not the case. So I personally think, as a public health person and official, that overwhelmingly the all mail-in is the way to go. I don't believe that we should have these options that could become confounding if something else emerges. Maybe folks could look at that as a conservative view, because again, hopefully in the spring it becomes quote unquote a nothing burger. But the reality is we don't know. So I think we should go the safe approach. And the other piece of it, if we looked at the annual survey, overwhelmingly the community had shared that they felt it was easy that the last election was held, and it was held well. So I don't think, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. But I also want to just put out there, listen, I think community events are amazing, and there's nostalgia, but there's also the idea of moving forward. So I would certainly love to see an event plan. Could be separate. It can be on a weekend, right? It could be a celebration, whatever it might be. So as many people could attend as possible, not just on a weekday in the evening, but perhaps on a weekend with kids, and we could get, some rides and stuff like that. So anyway, I just wanted to float things. I know of an opportunity this Thursday, but I strongly support what the committee has done so far, and I really appreciate all that hard work. Thanks.
Thank you. Andrew.
I think Lynn was ahead of me, so if you want,
right? Okay, Lynn.
Niles.
Yep, I'm asking. He might not be there just at the. Oh, there he is. Okay, good.
So it's my turn?
Yep.
Yes, please.
Okay. I see complications by a hybrid election. It just, one, laying out the guidelines and the rules puts an extra workload on coming up with language that would be clear and understandable and not challengeable by anyone. But I just think it opens the doors to challenges by the complication of who's voting by what process and at what time. Repeating what Jeff said, we're still under the threat of COVID-19 and the Omni variant. We don't know where we're going to be with that in May. Bottom line, the simplest, cleanest, is to go with one or the other. And with the threat of health, we have no choice but to go with email 100%, no hybrid. That's bottom line. Very simple, very clean. It's the least amount of work as far as prep and instructions to the voting public. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Andrew.
Yeah, just real quickly, couple of things. I just want to be clear that the election vendor that we used, this is for you, Peter, because you seem to be very concerned with possibility of election fraud and just an overall integrity, as everyone should be concerned. But these folks do statewide, they do cities, big cities, they do municipalities. I think they can handle these control numbers and making sure that there isn't double voting and all that, even if there's back and forth. And I know worst case scenario is what we have to game out with 200 ballots being sent back and forth, et cetera. But I just think, I think we should use them again. I think they did a great job last year. I mean, I don't have inside knowledge of how they, how the sausage was made, and maybe there were management issues and the council had problems with them throughout. But from the outside, it looked like they did a pretty good job. So I think we just have to kind of put our faith in the professionals and the idea of control numbers. There's a reason for that. So they can track these down pretty well. The other thing is, look, I could go both ways. I like the idea of mail-in, all mail-in, that the default is everyone gets a mail-in ballot, as we discussed in the past. You don't request it, that's the default. But that there is an opportunity for someone who may not have decided to mail it in. And I think probably traditionally last year, people wanted to get these ballots out as soon as possible. I mean, I know when I got mine, I sent it the next day. I didn't sit on it. But just having that opportunity to have a drop box at a certain, drop it off in person. I'm not, as Jeff is an expert in these matters as relates to the pandemic, but these are outdoor events and they seem relatively safe. So I could be convinced either way to have an event around it, but like you said, that's a council decision. And I just think that there should be an opportunity for folks to be able to drop them off if they didn't mail them in. But I think the default should be everyone receives a mail-in ballot. Okay.
Right. I think there's obviously a lot of sentiment in favor of, doing something in person. People want to show their kids the process of voting, whatever. And it was for that reason specifically that we designed this idea of, not having new ballots being issued right there at the table to keep the election process simple, but having a drop box where people could come and actually vote right there on the sidewalk with their kids, or just for the social pleasure of being with fellow residents. So that's what we were trying to achieve with that. And I think it's part of the plan that we have at the moment. It was all voted on unanimously by the committee, and unless somebody really voices strong opposition to this, I guess I'm inclined to say, let's go forward with the plan that we adopted, several weeks ago. And, we adopted it unanimously. So let me ask, is there anyone out there who really, really is opposed to this? Arthur, are you on board with this?
Hang on 1 second. Okay. 1 second. Let's see.
Okay. Yeah. I think, Peter, you've made a fairly cogent argument for the reasons to do a mail-in. I was on the fence with doing a hybrid. Jeff makes some good arguments. You've made good arguments. The complexity is there. I would say that committees in the past, there was a committee of 2 people for years and years and years managed to conduct the elections, made the count, got them in that night. and it all seemed to work. So those complexities may not be as complex as you think, but I think you do make a good argument, and Jeff does, and your other committee members. But you're the committee. You're the ones who have to come up with it.
Well, Arthur, let me say.
I'll step back at this point.
Well, Arthur, I think this meeting is an opportunity for us to hash out, the concerns on both sides. And, you originally have voiced opposition, and, so it's good to hear that, there's at least some movement on your part, and I appreciate that. And if you want to, say something against it, I think.
Yeah, let me start my bit. My concern with pure mail-in is what everybody else has said, the same concerns that others have had, is that it's kind of the tradition, it brings the community together, it's a way for people to meet and do other things, it supports the tradition of voting, and these are all good things to support. On the other hand, we have the arguments against that, and I think that you, Jeff, and others have made a solid argument, perhaps with our prodding, about why you should go ahead with the all mail-in. So, as I say, you're the committee. You vote on it, and we'll consider it.
Okay. Well, absent strong opposition, I see no reason to reconsider the vote that we already have taken on that. And I don't see any need for changes at this point. So that's what I propose. Okay, let's go on.
Peter, I have a question.
Sure.
Because I think one of the areas I got a little thrown is when we saw the plan as it went over to the council, it added something that I don't remember us discussing, and maybe I'm misremembering it, but it going from like all mail-in, and we have just a drop box that we are there on the day that gives us maximum flexibility to say if Omicron is really raging, we say like, look, we're not actually having any event down there, kind of thing. But then it added a thing where people could come down on the day and request that a new ballot be overnighted to them that they could then mail back in. And I think that threw me a little bit. Like, are we going with an all mail-in election where it's all mail-in? Maybe we have a drop box that we can utilize, maybe not. Or is this something where at the drop box, people are still able to be going through and requesting new ballots be overnighted to them, and what that effect that has on deadlines? I think that's one area where I got a little thrown and a little confused.
Well, I have to admit my memory is not perfect, but I had thought that was part of the plan all along, and we had talked about it that way. That people would be able to, well, I would imagine that that's a small number of people who have lost their ballot or had their ballot destroyed, and I thought we'd be able to handle that. I don't recall being something that I secretly added later. That was not my perception of it.
I remember us discussing a number of different options for how and if we wanted to handle things day of, but I didn't remember discussing or going into detail at all on something where it's at the Dropbox table, the ability, like working with the vendor to overnight new ballots. Then that was just something that I think that one threw me a little bit. And if that's the way we want to handle it, that's fine. But I think fundamentally, if it sounds like we want to keep pressing forward with all mail-in, I think you have to kind of decide, like, do we want to go legit all mail-in? The Dropbox is a Dropbox. It is not a service table. There isn't. You can show up at the table and say, I don't have a ballot. We can say, we have a box where you can put a ballot. That's your only option. If you want to do something else, you have to go through a different thing. Or are we saying we're all mail-in, but there's a service table on whatever day of event we have, and figure out what that looks like for reissuing ballot things, which also would probably a little bit go into some detail on what the timeline looks like.
Yeah, I don't know if you're, accusing me of having snuck something in, under cover of night. Let me assure you that I did not. It was part of the proposal that we voted on as a committee, that we agreed on, 5-0. And I did not add it at a later time. It was part of the proposal that was voted upon. And
I think, Peter, I think George was just asking, I recall as well early in one of the conversations that there was that option. It's all mail-in, but you have the option to bring the sealed envelope to a ballot box, and or if you've lost your ballot, request for an overnight. I think that was voted on as well, if I recall that correct. Is that all you're asking, George, or?
Yeah, I'm not trying to accuse you. I was just curious because I know we had discussed at various points a number of options, whether it's we've got ballots at the table that can be,
Right.
issued there, whether
I'm
it's
totally opposed to that. So the way
yeah, Peter, hang on. Can I finish getting through my
Sure.
Okay, so I'm not proposing any one of these. I just remember us discussing a number of ones, and so that's where I think the coming to the table and requesting overnighting ones, just trying to remember. I freely admit that might be something that was in the final plan that we voted on, and I missed it, or I'm not necessarily remembering it. But I think when I saw that one at the council one, that I think ticked a little bit for me because I don't remember talking through that one as much, and I don't remember talking about like the timeline of how the timelining stuff that would apply.
Yeah.
So I was just curious and making sure that was what we had previously discussed, and checking to make sure is that everyone else's recommendation or recollection, because I just wanted to make sure.
Unless I'm wrong, I think that we did discuss it, that there were concerns about what happens if somebody has lost their ballot. Are they going to be excluded from voting under those grounds? And so, that was what gave rise to this idea of, I expect that would be a very small number of people, whose dogs are hungry enough to eat a ballot, and that we would be able to handle that without difficulty. Also, it remains entirely a mail-in election because all we do is send an email to the contractor and say, this guy lost his ballot, please send him another one, and send it, by overnight mail, overnight express. So again, it's not a hybrid. We are not issuing ballots ourselves. There are not two sources of ballots. The first vote is canceled before the second one is sent out, and the contractor himself is in full control of that. I don't see it raising the same kinds of problems that some of the other hybrid versions do.
All right, that's fine. I think if we do have to make sure that the language is cleaned up, that it's very explicit around there's not a postmark deadline anywhere in there, because otherwise if they're showing up on election day and getting a ballot overnighted, then the earliest they could have it in the mail would be like 2 days after the election. So we just have to make sure the language is explicit around there's no postmark deadlines. It's just purely when it arrives.
I think that's the way I intended it, that there wouldn't be a postmark requirement, that it be mailed by a certain date. The only question is, when does it arrive? So we're giving ballots, at least at this point, we're giving ballots 2 weeks to arrive. 13 days. And if they haven't arrived by then, it's too bad. And it's a risk, I guess, if somebody gets his replacement ballot a day after election day and then votes it and mails it in, there is some risk that it might not get there in time. But there's 2 weeks, I think, is enough time for mail to get there, and that's we have to have some deadline. It's been made clear to me that the village does not have unlimited patience with all of this, and I think the postmark requirement is just adding more obstacles to the voting process for voters. If it gets there in time, it's counted, and if it doesn't get there in time, it's too bad, and you should have mailed your thing earlier. I don't know how to fix it beyond that. Right? You know, we allow plenty of time for the ballots to get there, and to me that seems like it should be sufficient. Paul.
Peter, we're all within 3 or 4 blocks of the office, the village office. Why not have a drop box at the village office that we could take our ballots down there and put them in a lockbox? We don't have to depend on the mail. I don't know who online tonight hasn't had trouble with the U.S. mail, the U.S. Postal Service, but we have people that have sent us things 2 weeks ago we still haven't received, and they mailed them 2 weeks ago, so we know that. So I think a drop box at the office down on the sidewalk area there, we can all drop it in.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't depend on the U.S. mail.
You mean, so everybody would have to walk their ballots down?
No.
Oh, they could mail it or drop their ballot.
Yeah, you have the choice. You have the choice. Yeah. If you mailed it, if you had 2 weeks time to do it, and you mailed it the next day, as we talked about here, it should arrive there. But you have the option at least to take it down there. I would take mine down there myself. It's a very easy thing to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting suggestion. Let me think about that a little bit before we move forward with it. Okay. Moving on. We're behind schedule already. And that is what brings us to the issue of ballot curing, and the whole idea of making an effort to resolve problems that have arisen with respect to an envelope en route to the contractor, or if the ballot isn't filled out, or if the husband and wife switched envelopes within a home, or whatever. Those to me seem like problems that are predictable and easy mistakes that well deserve to be fixed. I guess Jeff is left. And I think it's very viable. And so Arthur's expressed some concerns about the whole issue of ballot curing, and I'd like to have a chance to hear Arthur's thoughts on that, and see what we think at that point. Arthur?
Yeah, just give it a second.
Okay, here we go. Mm-hmm. And I'll even let you see what I look like. Okay, yeah. There's all kinds of curing, and I think the ones that you mentioned are curable. That is, signatures that are hard to make out, and the committees in the past have worked that through. They go by the rule that they give every opportunity to understand the will of the voter, and they look at the signature and they squint at it, and doesn't look like Paul Weller or Weiler, or is it Pat Weiler, or if it's at that address and that number, they say, yeah, that's probably him. Or there are the occasions, and this has been faced, where the coffee spills over the envelope and it's all smeared, and again you squint at it. And these issues have been faced in the past. The spouses mixing up the envelopes, that's been faced, and we even have legal counsel that it's acceptable to acknowledge the fact that that kind of mistake has occurred. But I think the one I have a difficulty with is your final curing is if there's no signature at all. And there are all kinds of situations where that could arise. somebody drops the envelope on the street and somebody else picks it up and sticks it in a mailbox, or anything. Somebody sends in a protest vote where they just have a big X across the ballot and don't sign it, or something worse scrawled across it. So my feeling is that, and again, you gave a good cogent argument why you should ignore me, but my feeling is that you have a regulation that you need a signature and address, and you tie that in with the code on the envelope. And if you decipher it and you apply all your curing and problem solving to the smudges and so on, you accept it. But for something that clearly doesn't have anything on it, my feeling is you should reject it. And the solution to that is, and let me steal from George's idea. I only plagiarize from good sources. George's idea is you do education beforehand. How do you fill it in? And you go over it and over it. And I'm not a public relations person or know how to do that, but you have to go over it and over it to tell people how you fill in the ballot. Now, last year, I know there were 4 ballots that had no signature and no address, and they were thrown out. They were not cured. They were not opened either. And so you don't know if there was some kind of a protest that the voter was making on the inside. And I think the year before there was I don't know the number, but it was a small number. So it's not like we have a case here of vast swaths of the community who don't know how to fill in ballots, who are befuddled or are making mistakes. It was 4 out of 400, 1% of the ballots that were sent in had that kind of a problem. So I don't think it's a major issue, and the kind of curing process that you're describing could take many days of follow-up to cure. So that's my argument, and as I said before, it's up to the committee how you want to deal with that, and I'll be here to listen to your deliberations.
Okay, let me take the first crack at responding. So I think that the process that we're proposing is one that can well address that problem. If somebody filled it out and just forgot to sign the thing, at that point we identify that as a problem ballot that we believe may be curable. And the next morning, after we go through this with the contractor on the evening of the 13th, identifying the potentially curable but non-conforming ballots, we will start calling the people who are identified as, as their ballots in some way need to be cured. And so, let's say Paul Weller's comes in, without a signature on it. The next morning, the morning of the 24th, we would go to the office, take the envelope, and say, okay, this is the control number identified with Paul Weller. And we would call Paul and say, Paul, did you send in your ballot? We have a ballot here that has your control number on it, but it doesn't have a signature. And as it stands, we can't allow it to be voted. It needs to be cured. We need the affidavit. And George and Paul would presumably say, oh, sure. It's mine, absolutely. I voted it, and gosh, I'm sorry, I forgot the ballot. I forgot the signature. And we say, no problem. We'll come over and we'll bring another affidavit for you to sign that will attest that you did indeed mail in your ballot, that it was the one that was sent to you, and that it's your ballot. And so we go over to Paul's house, even though could now identify Paul on the street with no problem. I say to Paul, please show me your driver's license or something. And Paul would show me his driver's license, and I would say, yup, that's Paul Weller, all right. and you look just like the picture. And I think Paul is looking forward to this, as a matter of fact. And we would say, yes, this is a valid vote at this point. And I don't see any reason not to do that, other than the fact that it might take a day or two to get this done. And that way we get, perfectly valid, otherwise completely valid votes sent in and included in the full count. And it makes it a more complete, more representative, and intrinsically more legitimate election, because the goal of an election is to reflect the sentiment of the community. So, I don't think it's a complicated thing, and I would support doing it. I think that it's the democratic thing to do. Yes.
Peter, I don't think any election goes door to door to validate someone's vote. I think we've completely overly complicated this, and I think we should take it to a vote. I think you've made it way, way, way too complicated. I'm sorry. No offense.
What would you do? How would you handle it?
I think what's been proposed here tonight through Paul and George are really valid options. I think what you've just suggested is just really, I've never heard of anything like that. And I certainly don't have the capacity to go door to door and validate someone's signature and driver's license. So
I have time. I can do it.
Well, I'm not willing to vote for that.
Okay. Yes, I don't know who you are, but the lady with her hand up.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. You. I'm asking you to unmute.
Maybe you could tell us your name. I don't know who you are. Susan. I'm sorry.
Susan.
I didn't recognize you.
Susan. Okay, there we go.
At the last council meeting, Peter, I believe you said something like, so we should cure the ballots if we know, I wrote this down because I found it kind of stunning, even if they know the person and how they voted. I think that is introducing, you suggested that those ballots should be cured if you know the person and how they voted. That introduces an element of partiality that's hard to contemplate. Maybe you didn't anticipate that, or you don't really plan to do it that way. But I think that anytime you expect to override rules in order to include new people who haven't followed rules, you run the risk of creating very serious problems.
I'm sorry, I don't believe that I really said.
Okay, well, I think this is why
how they voted. I think I may have said even if we know that they voted.
No.
But there's no way that I would know how somebody voted.
And that's why we actually need minutes on a prompt basis. And actually, maybe we're going to need audios of your committee tapes, of your committee meetings as well. Just since there seems to be some confusion about what actually transpired.
Let me say right now, to be clear, that I do not intend to know how anybody in the community will vote. I do not know.
That's good.
And I do not intend in any way to, attempt to find out how someone voted so I can decide whose vote to cure and who's not. That is not my intention. I am trying hard to run as clear and fair and unbiased an election as I possibly can. And I believe the whole committee is with me on that particular score. And I am not aware of any, inappropriate intention on anybody's part in the committee. And let me, just if I misspoke at that time, which I don't think I did, but I can't completely say absolutely not. Let me just say right now, for the record, that I do not intend in any way to know what's inside the envelope.
And I would, just to be clear, I would expect that, and I have absolute confidence in your committee members. I just think that when you start stepping into new areas in order to achieve an absolutely perfect result, you run the risk of really tarnishing a good track record that could be achieved without trying to become 100% inclusive. I think people have a minimum standard to which they should adhere of following rules. That's just voting 101. And I think that you just have to go for that 99% or whatever, and not the 100. Done.
Okay, let me just say as partial response that this is not a new thing in Martin's Editions. People have been curing ballots in Martin's Editions for a long time. And the other way in which ballots might be cured, even if there isn't a mail-in election, is with absentee ballots. And I happened to talk to Ted Stoddard a few days ago, who was on the VMA election committee for many years. I think he said 25 years. And he told me very clearly that, you know, with respect to absentee ballots, they had been attempting to cure absentee ballots that had come in without, you know, clear identification, you know, basically for his entire time on the election committee. And, you know, so I don't think it's a new thing at all. I think it's carrying on a tradition. So, yes, Katie. Is that Katie?
Yeah, I'm asking her.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Hi.
Okay. Hi, Katie.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, hi. Good evening, Peter. I gotta say, I kind of disagree. I feel like it's undoing 40 years of tradition, and I appreciated hearing from Leah what she had to say, and Susan. It's a little bit of reinventing the wheel to me, but I also, if not putting Leah on the spot and to backtrack, I was wondering her view on the mail-in versus in person. Because we didn't get to hear from her, and we heard from everybody else on the committee.
Yeah, you're unmuted, Leah.
Okay. Honestly, I could be swayed either way. I think in person with a contractor works for me. I could also, previously I had been in favor of a hybrid, like a full-on hybrid. Mm-hmm. And I think that it also is making it overly complicated. I could be swayed either way, but one thing is for sure is I'm to repeat, I'm not on board with the current proposal.
Yeah.
And I'd actually like to take this to a vote. I mean, I think we can move past this because I think we have a majority.
Okay. No, I wanted to hear from you. Thank you. And now I feel like I've heard from everyone on the council. I mean, on the committee. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay. So Arthur's proposal was that we cure everything except ballots that are envelopes that are unsigned. Is that correct?
I'm asking Arthur to unmute, but I think that was what he was saying. Yes.
I think there's a lot that can be done with smudged and dirty and all kinds of problematic ballots. But the ones that simply are unsigned and with no address are, I would think, uncurable on election night. Without going, it would be necessary to go through your process. And I agree with Susan that in this case, the instruction should be followed. And it's not like we have an illiterate, bypassed community of people here whose community views are being ignored. This is a community with one of the highest income levels and education levels in the entire country. We're not talking about the downtrodden masses here. These people do their own trotting on their own. So I don't think it's a real issue. But I see that George has his symbolic hand up.
George, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm on board with Leah. I think going door to door, first off, puts us in an untenable position where I've worked the door at bars and tried to look at IDs, and I have no interest in ever doing that ever again. I'm on board with Arthur. I think we had 4 out of almost 430. That's like a 0.9% rate of people who didn't sign their ballots. I think everything else is stuff where we have existing guidance that says we can fix it. But unsigned ballots, I think you're asking someone to attest where they looked at the back of the ballot long enough to memorize that this is my ballot control number, but not enough to read the instructions on the signature. I think trying to come up with a whole other process for getting them to sign a separate affidavit that attests that this blank envelope is my blank envelope is too much. I think, yeah, we can use the existing provisions in place to fix everything else. But if there's nothing on the back of that envelope, I think that's one where the voters clearly had a chance to complete it that way, and we should, move on.
So let me say that no, I forgot my point. We're not asking anybody to memorize their control number. We're just asking if people mailed in the ballot that got mailed to them. So it came in, it sat in my mail. I brought it into the living room, I put it on the sofa, I opened it, I filled it out, I put it back in the envelope and mailed it. And I just didn't read the back and sign
Peter, we understand, but it's not something we want to do. It's not something the committee, or George and I at least.
Me and George don't
yeah,
want to do.
we don't, but we understand what you're saying. You don't need to repeat it. In
George
the
was
interest of time, it's 8:39.
Say it again?
I said, in the interest of time, it's 8:39.
Okay. Okay, Andrew, you had a point you wanted to make.
Just real quickly, and based on Susan's comments and Arthur's comments, I just want to let you know that there seems to be a majority on the council at this point that feel that a blank envelope, not a smudged one where you can maybe find a way to say like, wow, maybe the rain impacted this, but a blank envelope. And I remember you have to do quite a bit to get to the point where you're putting an envelope in an envelope. And I mean, you're paying attention to all those points, but not one of the more important ones. I think at some point it's disqualifying. And as Arthur pointed out, we have a pretty smart constituency here that reads well, that's literate. At a certain point, I think we just move on. It's, and as George said, 4 out of 430. And we can do an education process. We can remind folks over and over again as we anticipate ballots arriving. And don't forget, sign the back of the envelope. And we with bullhorns in the neighborhood. But I mean, there are limits, I think, to what you guys need to put yourselves through.
Okay.
Peter, should we vote on this? Should the committee vote on this issue?
Yes, let's vote on it. Okay. All right. So Arthur has proposed that we make an effort to cure all ballots except those that are entirely unsigned on the back. So we are already curing, we have already voted to cure all ballots. That was part of our original proposal. So now we are voting on the decision as to whether to remove from that only those ballot envelopes that are entirely unsigned on the back. Everybody clear what we're voting on? We're voting to remove from our proposal an effort to cure ballots that are entirely unsigned. Okay? Okay, all in favor of that proposal?
Do we have to, I think for minutes purposes.
Move in second. So is there a motion?
Yeah, I move that we adopt that proposal and remove the language that would provide a process for curing unsigned ballots.
Okay, Leah, you want a second?
I second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, looks like a majority. Okay, so that's right.
Right, Peter, I need to track it for the minutes. So it was
I believe that
5 or 4.
it was 4 that I heard 4 because I saw.
So I'm voting against.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we can vote. We can do the whole thing, but
Yeah. No, that's acceptable. So yes, it's 4-1.
Okay, next. So then there's this issue of, do we allow 2 weeks for ballots to get 13 days after Election Day to get to the contractor or some lesser amount of time, which may be 11, something between 7 and 14, as I understand the proposal. Is that fair, Arthur?
Ask him to unmute. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Peter, you cite, I believe correctly, all the delays in the mail, but I believe, and you're going to have to check on this, that the post office gives special treatment to identify postal ballots. And
So
this, I think last year, George, if I'm not mistaken, somebody on the committee spoke to the local postmaster and they said, these get special treatment so that you cannot use the average delivery times that you experience through ordinary mail. I'm not sure whether that continues to be the case. This is something that you would have to check with the post office. But if that is the case, the last 2 years, no ballot appeared at the vendor after the designated time. I see Tiffany has her camera on, and George are there. So you can refresh my very imperfect memory on this.
Yeah, hang on.
Tiffany?
What Arthur is stated, I believe, is accurate. I would also just encourage, if it's going to be a 2-week mailing period, just get the ballots here earlier. Once the candidates are announced, if you're going to have things mailed, get them mailed here earlier so that, you can have the deadline, as George said, of election day. There would be no reason to have that the period extended beyond election day. You could have them, in the vendor's hand by 3 p.m. election day, and then the counting happens and you're, able to announce results, that night or the next day. It's not a longer period than that.
Right. Well, we want to give people, an opportunity to be informed by the forum. So we can't do it too early. We could move it up a week, but I don't really see what the rush is. I think that 2 weeks seems like a reasonable amount of time. Some people are slow. Also, we'll be handing out ballots, at least according to the current plan, we'll be handing out ballots on the day after Election Day. That is, the ballots would arrive from the contractor, presumably the day after or possibly 2 days after Election Day. So if Election Day is the 13th, as we currently have it scheduled, then those ballots would come in on the 15th. And if they're mailed at that point, then that's when at least some ballots will be coming in. And I see no reason to exclude them.
Isn't Election Day the 10th?
I'm sorry?
I thought we discussed several times before. Election Day is the 10th of May, not the 13th.
The 10th, yes.
You said we're doing it on Tuesday.
That is correct. I'm sorry, I apologize.
Okay.
That is correct. Yes, Tiffany.
And I think that you guys had previously said the forum was going to be on either April 9th or 10th. So that's a month. That's 4 weeks of time between the forum.
No, I think that we said it would be. Let me find the procedures. Let's see.
From my memory and my notes, I think we said we didn't pick and fix a date for the forum. We said hopefully early to mid-April, but we didn't fix a date because I remember last year that was the concern we had, where we had fixed the date in the election plan, and it was the one where we kind of said, "Oh, we really hope that everybody's schedules actually work for this." Kind of.
But if you did it in earlier April, that would give you a month.
Yeah.
And that would beat spring breaks and that kind of stuff. If you did it in earlier April, if you do it in late April, you're going to run into spring breaks.
So the charter requires 45 days from Election Day back to when nominations close. So that's not something that's flexible, right? So if you start moving the moment at which voting happens.
I'm not suggesting you change your nominations timeline, your candidate forum.
I'm sorry, you want to change the candidate forum?
If you have your candidate forum earlier, then you're able to get, people are able to, as you say, hear from the candidates. If they have their ballots, they can mail them in and have, a month of time between the candidate forum and counting day. And that would also, as you guys, I think, talked about earlier, scrapping the postmark. Well, you don't need a postmark anymore. You just need a received by day. Wouldn't it make sense to have a single received by day, whether you're carrying it to the office or it being received by the vendor? That's a single day.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you're saying about carrying it to the office. Could you run that by me one more time?
So if somebody had their mail-in ballot, I think, as Paul mentioned earlier, I think you guys agreed that there would be a box for people to take their mail-in ballot to on election day, then that's the deadline. It either has to be in the box by whatever time.
And that day, the
or it has to be
is May 10th.
May 10th, or to the vendor by May 10th. Have it be the same deadline so you don't have two deadlines floating out there. And that would also allow you guys to count that day. It wouldn't continue to push the announcement back another 2, maybe 3 weeks.
People aren't getting their ballots until April 20th under our plan.
I think we should probably move that, right, Peter?
So we're I guess it's movable, but that's the current plan. So basically, if you're going to start messing with the schedule, we have to rethink the whole timing of the election, it seems to me, because we have requirements about when the nominations close and when the nominations open and other events along the way.
And none of that changes. I mean, Peter, you've got your nominations open, your nominations closed. You guys sorted a timeline for that complies with the charter. Okay. Now you're talking about the things that are, afterwards, the candidate forum and when a vendor mails the ballot. I mean, the vendor can be told to mail the ballot, Niles, you're as a contract manager, I won't speak for you, but, I imagine you could tell the vendor to mail the ballot the day after you have names.
We could.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear from Niles on that, because I think right now the plan is we've got the names locked March 28th, right?
Yeah. So, yes. So the idea would be that the nominations would end, the nomination period will close March 18th, 2020. Then the conflict of interest and disclosure by 6 p.m. on the 25th, I think, was the last part. And then the announcement would just simply be either, I think the 25th is a Thursday, I want to say, so we could announce them either in the wrap-up on Friday or in the newsletter that comes out that following Monday. Then from there, I was looking at everybody and then I hit the wrong thing. And then in terms of the vendor, we could give the vendor, a deadline to issue the ballots, but that could be, dependent on whatever you want to do. Like, I think what is said in the plan, I think, is to get it to the vendor by April 15th, but you could change that date. You could make it April 1st or April 5th or whatever, depending on what you wanted to do. It's just it's all it is. The only thing, and this is one thing that I was thinking about, is the only thing that would have to be last on the ballot is just the names of the candidates. So the committee will have already approved all of the other language on the ballot, so it would just be the names. So which wouldn't take very long, I'd think, to get them it run through. You get a mock-up, you look at it, you say, yep, the names are spelled correctly, and then you approve it. So that's sort of the only thing there. This isn't,
So what about the forum. I mean, presumably people rely on the forum, so we would have to move the forum up until late March, perhaps, or the first week of April instead of, the third week.
Yeah, you could do it. Yeah, the first or second week, and we could
get this done. Nominations close on the 25th. We have the forum on the 26th. Ballots have to be in by the 27th, and we could have, wait. It just doesn't make sense to me personally.
Peter, what I was just suggesting earlier is if you get into that mid to late April, you start to run into the school break periods where people are out. And so I know in the past there's been a desire for candidates as well as for the public to be able to participate or in the forums to avoid, the 2 kind of or 3 weekends, one in the middle, where people are possibly out of town. And this year it happens to start, April 10th, 17th is Easter, and the 24th or 25th, people are starting to come back. So if you have the forum,
it's 2 weeks. Is that right? It's 2 weeks?
Yeah. If you had the forum like the 9th or the 10th, you would still have a month between then and election day to have ballots in. Does that make sense?
I guess it does. So, and what's the reason that we want to do it so fast?
Well, it gives people time, as you said, it gives more lead time. The sooner you get their ballots in their hand, the longer time they have to get them mailed in. Mm-hmm. I would also, and you also can end on a date certain, since you guys are having a deadline, no postmark by, just must be received by, then that received by date and time is the same received by date and time. Andrew has also added to my knowledge, Passover begins April 15th. So, just again, trying to have that forum before holidays, religious, so and just travel.
That's basically a 2-day thing.
Right. So you would have the forum and then have a whole month of time for those ballots to trickle in before Election Day.
Can I just add, and I didn't raise my hand, but it also, as I experienced after our forums, but I also experienced post-forum more and more residents wanting to follow up on questions directly with the candidates. So it gives you more time as well to engage with folks after one of these debates.
Right. I guess, the other possibility is that people are just getting to know the candidates, for the first week to 10 days and may not have questions well developed, may not really know what's important to ask, and giving them a little extra time to begin to develop their opinions and to figure out what it is they really want to know from each candidate is something that can be served by being a little bit later. And, personally, I think that's valuable. And so the idea that Election Day is the date on which all ballots have to be in means that they have to be mailed typically a week to 10 days earlier, possibly even 2 weeks earlier. And so people are mailing their ballots by late April. And, to me, it seems like that really shortens it means that there's a 1 month campaign, which is much shorter than it's usually been. So, when I ran in 2019, I walked the entire community. I knocked on every door. That took me a considerable amount of time. And I really think that that's the reason that I got the votes that I did. I got a large number of votes. So, that to me was my plan. It was effective. And I think that you would be, I'm concerned that you might be forestalling it or, forcing me to, spend my night walking around the village rather than, getting some rest. I don't know. It seems very abbreviated to me, and I don't see the danger. I don't see the problem in letting there be a little bit of time. And furthermore, for those people who have lost or destroyed their ballots, then so it eliminates. Let's see. I guess we would have to make it at least maybe 2 days later from election day at the very earliest, because we're going to be sending them by overnight in some way or other. So it may take a day, it may take 2 days, I'm not quite sure.
Peter, you could hire a vendor to be here. They could do the count here.
Do they have all their voting counting machines? And
yeah. That is something that we could do. We could make as part of the RFP for a vendor to have them have one of the counting machines here, and then have another. They used 2 counting machines last year, so you could have one in the village and one at their location. They could do it simultaneously. So, but
there's one issue that I wanted to raise here, having to do with the candidates forum, is that I would think that you'd want to have the ballots in the hands of the voters at the time of the forum, so that people hear the candidates, they say, that's my person, and go out and mail the ballot that day. Instead of hearing the candidates at the forum, and 3 weeks later a ballot appears, and they can't even remember who was that person whose name I see down here. So having the ballots in hand at the time of the forum, and as Tiffany says, we have Easter, we have Passover, we have Good Friday, right in the middle of the month. And the choice is either go before that or to go after that. And I think Tiffany is suggesting going before. So it means having the forum, having the ballots out, giving people a month to send in their ballots. And it may give more opportunity for the dog to chew it up, but it also gives you a greater opportunity to get it in the mail with plenty of time.
Well, so, if we did it afterwards, after that magic period, when Easter and Passover take place, what's the date of Easter? I'm sorry.
That is
17th.
The 17th.
17th.
And school is
Passover
usually
is the 15th. Good Friday is the 15th.
Right.
We all celebrate at one time this year.
And schools are usually out for that full week after. So people potentially wouldn't be returning till the 24th.
The school your kids go to?
Ours usually coincides with Montgomery County. I'm trying to go on Montgomery County's website right now to find out.
Peter,
our spring break usually coincides with me. Go ahead, George.
Can I ask really quick, Peter, what was our rationale behind having the candidates locked on March 28th? And because I think the 25th, I think the deadline is a Friday. But having the candidates locked on the 28th, but people not getting their ballots for a month?
Well, I think the idea was, that it's typical to have elections in Martin's edition sometime in the mid to early part of May, early to mid part of May. And so, we were kind of staying with tradition in that respect. And, I think I wanted to make sure that people had enough time, from the closing of nominations and the announcement of nominations, possibly a few days later, since it's on a Friday, is now suggested we might do it on a Monday. So then, people do not become informed about people they don't know, within the space of a day or two. This is a process of learning, of hearing different things from different people, comparing the notes and talking to your neighbors, and it's very much a communal thing. It isn't something obvious, where you're voting your party ticket in a general election. Here you're getting to know people that in general you don't know very well. And
So,
I think that's a process that is time dependent.
I'd be in favor of getting ballots in people's hands as quickly as possible, and it's their business how they vote. If they want to see the name of candidates and cast their ballot a week later, in my mind, that's their business. And getting them ballots earlier gives us maximum flexibility on getting everybody's got more than enough chance to get ballots in the mail and get them back. We're not, like I said, last year I think we definitely had no ballots that showed up more than a week after. And by the tail end, and Tiffany can probably back me on this, the last couple of days in the run-in, we had very, very few ballots, and almost all of those were postmarked after the election date anyway, which lined up with the code that we had last year. And I think it gives us maximum flexibility around trying to schedule the forum. And so I think trying to get ballots in people's hands quickly is going to make things easier, and it takes the most kind of just complications out of it at that point. Once we're going to know on, I think, March 28th is the plan, who the candidates are. And as Niles pointed out, we can probably very rapidly check the names and the name rotation at that point and have everything else pre-done, including the education piece around, remember, you do actually have to sign the back of this.
And can we vote on that?
Well, I just want to say, it also, I'm concerned that it forecloses the possibility of people coming down to the table and asking for, saying, I lost my ballot, I need a new one. So we should allow a couple of days for that, and then we have to allow, at a minimum, a week for things so we can move the election day up until the middle of April, as far as that goes. But the question is, does this really serve the interests of the voters? And I think that's really the criterion. And I think, what really serves the interests of the voters is giving them enough time to.
Yeah, I'm not proposing moving election day off May 10th. What I'm proposing is, instead of, we don't send the names of the vote for the ballot so that people aren't getting their ballots until the second or third week of April. I'm saying we're going to know the 28th. Let's send that over and try and get people their ballots at the beginning of April. We can cast them until May 10th. I'm not saying we move up election day. I'm just saying let's get ballots in people's hands as quickly as possible.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure that this really results in, it's as if people could go out and vote in a general election, the day after candidates announce that they're running. And that's, to me, that's not the way any election that I'm aware of is managed. Typically, people announce, in public elections, they announce a year in advance. Why? Because they want to let voters get to know them, to become informed, to, let the issues mature and ripen and be well discussed. And there's value in that. That's part of what an election does. It's not just marking a name on a ballot. It's developing, public view of what public policy is going to be, of, who do we think is best able to do this? Who do we think is an honest person and who's not? There's all kinds of things that information.
And that, Peter, is something everyone can judge how they approach it for themselves. Let's get them the ballots as quickly as possible. That way everyone can make that approach, that decision for them. We don't need to hold their hands and say, well, we want you to think about it for at least 3 weeks. That's not our business. They're in the village. Let's get them the ballots as quickly as they can. If they want to hold it for the whole month and talk to everybody a bunch, that's their business.
We're already getting it to them, no later than April 20th. That's what's in so that's approximately 3 weeks.
Peter, your committee sounds like they're arguing to get it to them even earlier. If statements are due the 25th and the newsletter would come out on the 28th, those names would be in the newsletter on the 28th. There's no reason for you not to have ballots being mailed by the end of March, and then people have the ballots for all of April in their hands. If they're able to do the forum, they're able to talk to whoever they want. You're just saying your deadline for them to be received is election day, May 10th. You've given them at that point, 5+ weeks. Sorry, Arthur.
Okay.
Yeah, hang on 1 second, Arthur. 1 second. Okay, go ahead.
I didn't want to cut you off, Tiffany. I just wanted to add that Peter, I don't understand why you're resisting this. The mail-in elections for the president in many, many states and areas, you could do it a month or more beforehand. As George says, let people make the decision. I think having the forum, having the statements out, putting it out in the various village publications, and let people, whenever they decide to do it, we don't have, and then up to the final day, up to May 10th. Doing it, I don't see what the issue is of doing it earlier. If you're going to go out and campaign door to door, you just have to get out earlier to do it.
I think there's.
Paul says
go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion as a committee member to send out the ballots on Monday, April 11th as a deadline. That's a month, a little bit more than a month.
Okay, so that moves it up by 10 days. That seems reasonable to me. So at that point, people will have had the names for about 2 weeks. So instead of 3 weeks, it's about 2 weeks. So it would be no later than April. What was the date? April 11th.
11th, yeah, that's a Monday. Mm-hmm. No later than. They could do it. Send them out before if you wanted to, but.
Okay,
Do we have a second? Do we have a second?
Second.
George seconds.
Okay. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Okay. Fair enough.
And then, hang on one second.
Wait.
I just wanted to make sure, Natalie, did you want to vote?
I agree.
Okay. It's unanimous. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other issues? Let me address this to the council members. Are there any other issues that are floating around in your mind that might cause you to not be willing to support our proposal?
Be careful, council members. Sorry, because Peter's just asked you a policy question.
Yeah.
Are there any other with the council members, are there any questions floating around that you would like to hear answered?
A few, although this is up to the council. No other council member can reply to this, or we will be having a policy discussion. But the charter amendments, these will have to be taken up by the council at their will. But I would, as I've written and we've discussed, I think one of them is probably well taken because if we happen to have a tied election and given a vote by mail, there just isn't the time, according to the charter, to get everything done to run a runoff. But the others, I think, are not needed and are well within the present statements of the charter. And charter amendments are complicated. They take time. They take months to accomplish. And if they're not needed, I don't think we should do it. But that's the only thing that I would suggest at this point.
Okay. My view is that all of these are generally good ideas.
That's why you propose them.
That's right. Let's see, I think the idea of canceling uncontested elections is a really bad idea, and we should not put ourselves in the position where we're going to start canceling elections because we are already allowed to simply move the date until after the emergency is passed. So I would stand by that one, and I think there's value in that. The business about consulting with the committee, I would like to change that and say that all charter amendments should be announced to the public, even if there is a state of emergency, that they should be at the very least announced to the public, and there should be an opportunity for public discussion of the charter amendments, so that the council should not be in a position to be able to change the charter under which we all live arbitrarily and secretly. That this is something that should be done, and I would be happy to change it to not be about coming to the council, but coming to the public. How would you feel about that, Arthur?
That's makes a little bit more sense. And then there's a question of how much time to have, a week, a day. That's language. Well, Tiffany.
Yeah, I was just gonna hang on one second, Tiffany.
I mean, I guess I'm a little. The process already requires that this be made public repeatedly and even broader than just in Martin's editions. I mean, this has to be put in a new
Tiffany, the problem is with emergencies, where the emergency, some of these timing, the delays for comment are done away with.
They're shorter, but again, I would say they're also emergencies.
Yeah.
Well,
it's not us declaring a state of emergency. It would be the governor of Maryland declaring a state of emergency.
Well, but Peter is thinking that under the guise of emergency, dire things could be done.
Right.
I would say historically that hasn't been an issue.
I believe there were, in fact, amendments adopted in 2020 that were done under the authority of the emergency declaration that were not in any way a response to the emergency, but simply took advantage of the fact that there was, this declaration that allowed them to do it.
Yeah.
And those, were not, those should have been discussed in public.
I don't know what you're referring to, but I don't recall anything like that.
But I believe that they were not, those amendments in April of 2020 were not done with any public announcement whatsoever.
No, but
they were announced publicly, Peter. I mean, we absolutely discussed them at council meetings. We had to discuss them publicly. But again, maybe that's something that if you raise specifically what your concerns were with amendments and changes to the council, then they can determine. I'm not obviously on the council nor. They could determine whether or not it's something that they want to take up now.
Yeah.
Okay, so, okay, I'll check my facts on that, but that's been my understanding for some time, that amendments to the charter were in fact adopted.
With reference to the election.
Yes, with reference to the election in the spring of 2020.
Yes,
that were not announced to the public.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. But they weren't extraneous. They were direct and to the point, as far as I can tell, as I recall.
Well,
Tiffany,
it wasn't.
I mean, I don't have them all in front of me now, but one of them we had to. One of them required in-person voting. That was an amendment. We had to deal with the charter's requirement that all voting had to be done in person unless people did it absentee. That's what allowed us to run the first ever mail-in process in 2020. So again, I Peter, I would say that there are specific amendments.
Would have ruled that out. It had to be done.
I'm sorry?
Even 1 week of public knowledge of this could not be allowed.
Peter, I don't recall the full timeline of when we put things out. I mean, I know that they were in the meeting packets. Niles could probably go back and, determine when they were published and how often they were viewed. But I don't want to spend more time tonight debating what happened in 2020. I don't think it gets the committee or the council anywhere. I think.
Well, so since you're doing it anyway, then you'd have no trouble putting it in the charter.
Say that again?
Since you think you have to do it anyway, then, or since you are willing to do it anyway, then you'd have no objection to putting it in the charter.
Can I ask, is any of this something that, as a election committee, we need to address, or is this something that Peter would be better served to address your concerns directly with the council at whatever their next meeting is?
Yeah.
Just say, I missed your comment, Tiffany.
No, that was George.
Tiffany was saying something, and George started talking over her.
I was saying, it's something I would raise to the next council about what specific concerns you may have had with specific amendments that were made in 2020, and and why that would impact your recommendations for now. But obviously that's, that's for
in
the
general, I
current
think
council.
adopting amendments without public notice or discussion is probably not a good idea, since we all have to live under them. Unless they're really, really an emergency, responding directly to an emergency. We're not going to have elections on the sidewalk because, the building burned down or something like that.
So,
it's not responsive to the emergency. What's wrong with having public discussion of it?
I'm sorry, I wasn't called on, but I'd like to raise my hand. I just want to go back to something that Katie said earlier, which is I feel like we're doing a lot of reinventing the wheel. That's it seems really superfluous and unnecessary to me. And I appreciate public discourse about amendments, but only if the amendments improve the process. And I'm not clear that a lot of what you proposed, Peter, have improved the process. And in interest of time, I have to leave very soon to work my job, and we're now running on 2 hours. So in the interest of time,
Leah, I'm not sure that you entirely understand the process.
Okay.
I don't think that's fair to say to your committee member.
Well, I think it's true, and I think if there were ever a moment at which we could talk about it, I think it would be a little better. But that moment does not seem to exist. So, Leah, I don't mean that to be as harsh as it sounds, but it's been frustrating to try to, convey what I'm thinking when there isn't a time when I can explain to you what's happening. So
we've gone over these issues several times, and I just feel like I'm not sure that to Tiffany's point, I'm not sure that you're hearing your committee members. So, but I'm not.
Tiffany is not on the committee.
No, I know, but she's observing.
And she is welcome to observe, and I am happy to have her.
Right. So I'm just quoting her
We're
observation.
talking about George because the other people are not talking. So
yeah, I'm just quoting her observation, which is I've mostly been quiet during these sessions, but I think we need to move this thing along. So and I feel like several of your committee members are on the same page, and so
which ones?
Sorry?
Which ones?
Myself, George, and Paul. I don't mean to speak for you, but I feel like we're on the same page. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. And Natalie, we can hear from Natalie.
Yeah, I can. Yep.
I'm sorry. So you all approved the amendments initially, and now you don't support them.
Oh, Peter,
Didn't we talk about this earlier?
Can I offer my thoughts on this? I think when we discussed the amendments, we didn't have a ton of time to review them in advance of the last meeting, and they were specific to the election. They were charter amendments relating to moving the timeline around when ballots have to be announced. Was one of the amendments that I voted against, which was, I think, what this one is now turning into, related to a requirement that there be a consulting with the election committee, which to me struck me as committee business. This sounds like it is something that it has to do with how the council is addressing charter amendments, which to me is not part of what our responsibility is. It sounds like it's an issue for the council to talk about. And so that's why I feel like...
Why I'm proposing it to the council.
Well, then I'm not sure why we're discussing it here. And I don't think that it's fair to say that we don't understand the process, because I think if you have multiple committee members who don't understand how this is tied to what we're doing, I don't think that's a problem with a committee member and alleging that they don't understand the process. So I think we should
I'm not sure that
past
any
this,
of the...
because this is something that sounds like it's an issue for you to discuss with the council, not with us.
I'm not sure that any of the amendments relate specifically to this election. However, all of them relate to the process of elections in general. And I think that is a valid and reasonable concern of the election committee. And nobody else is going to raise those issues because, nobody else is intimately involved with elections.
I think if it's about how the council adopts charter amendments, that's the purview of the ethics committee as well. There could be charter amendments about ethics. There could be charter amendments about public safety.
Of course.
Any of the other committees have purview over this.
Can I just make one quick suggestion? The goal of the committee right now is to propose a plan for the 2022 elections, right? So why don't we focus on that, get that done, and then then the committee can pick up any future amendments or changes to the charter, because as you just pointed out, this is long-term. We're not talking about, because we know this is not going to impact necessarily the next election. This is long-term. Let's focus on then long-term once we get this thing out of the way. Once we get this proposed plan for 2022 approved by the committee and approved by the council, and then we can take on the other amendments. I looked at 2020, April, March, April. These were all temporary changes due to, all related to the election and mail-in and et cetera. But
Exactly.
just you're losing sight of what you guys are trying to accomplish today, and that is getting a plan for this upcoming election. And then you focus on long-term.
And this is Katie. I completely agree with Andrew as a council member.
Okay, so then let's postpone the discussion of the amendments.
Yes.
And after the council adopts or does whatever it chooses to do with the election plan, then we will call another meetings to focus specifically on the amendments. Is that okay? Is that agreeable to everybody? Leah? Okay. George?
I'm fine as long as we can demonstrate that the charter amendments we're discussing are the purview of the election committee, and not something that is being called for kind of where it's us as members of the village and not as the committee.
So what is within our purview?
Changes to the charter that would be necessary to facilitate the execution of the election.
And that is to be discussed at a later time.
Yeah.
Yeah. We really have to keep these meetings to 2 hours or less.
Okay, we started at 7:30.
Yeah. And we're at 9.
Okay, so we're going to suspend for the moment the issue of the charter amendments. And I take it that we have reached the point where the council can move forward on our proposed election plan for 2022.
Good.
Okay, we're very good.
We're on track.
Adjourn?
I have no vote, but I'll vote for that.
Okay. Okay, well, anybody want to move to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Okay, anybody want a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good. Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night.